Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking open a really fascinating psychological report that tries to decode the personality of a major public figure, South Korea's First Lady Kim Gun-hee, using the famous Myers-Briggs framework, the MBTI. So how do you make sense of a public figure who seems to send so many conflicting signals? Well, this report gives it a shot, using a psychological framework to look at her public actions, her statements, and all the media coverage surrounding her. Now, a really crucial point right up front. The report itself is super clear that this is not, and I repeat, not a clinical diagnosis. Think of it more like a psychological case file. It's an analysis based on public data, all to build a hypothesis from the outside in. We're just here to explain what the report found.
All right, here's our game plan for this investigation. We'll start with the psychological toolkit they used. Then we'll sift through the public clues, weigh the main hypotheses against a strong alternative, and finally get to the report's final verdict.
So first up, how exactly does an investigation like this work? Well, the report uses the 4 dimensions of the MBTI as a kind of lens, looking for consistent patterns in everything we see of Kim Gun-hee's public life.
But before we can even look at the evidence, we have to understand the tools. You know, the MBTI is built on 4 key pairs of preferences that describe how we all tend to operate in the world.
First is energy direction. Just think about how you recharge your batteries. Are you an extrovert? Do you need to be around people to feel energized? Or are you more of an introvert, someone who needs that quiet, solo time to get your energy back?
Next up, how we take in information. Are you a sensing type? You're focused on the hard facts, what's real and right in front of you. You see the individual trees. Or are you an intuitive type? You're more about connecting the dots, seeing the bigger picture, the patterns, the whole forest. Then there's how we make decisions. If you have a thinking preference, you're probably going to lean on logic and objective principles. But if you have a feeling preference, you'll put more weight on your personal values, on group harmony, and how your decision is going to affect the people involved. And finally, lifestyle. Do you love a good plan? You know, a structured, orderly life where things are settled? That's a judging preference. Or do you thrive on being flexible, spontaneous, keeping your options open for as long as possible? That's the perceiving preference.
Okay, this table is basically the perfect cheat sheet for how all this stuff actually shows up in the real world. For instance, an extrovert often talks to think, literally working through their ideas out loud. An introvert does the complete opposite, thinking it all through inside their head before they say a word. This is the exact toolkit the report uses to sort through all the public evidence. All right, we've got our toolkit. Now it's time to play detective. And when the report starts applying this framework to Kim Gun-hee's public record, some really interesting contradictions just pop right out.
First, her energy seems like a total paradox. On the one hand, you've got this very active K-culture salesperson with a huge network, which screams extrovert. But on the other hand, she has these long stretches where she withdraws from public view and seems to prefer written interviews, which totally points to introvert.
And her decision-making style is just as puzzling. She's known as this passionate animal rights advocate. Clearly driven by her values and empathy, that's a classic feeling trait. But she was also a very successful CEO, and her public image, even her fashion, is seen as incredibly calculated and strategic, and that's a classic thinking trait.
So how does the report solve these puzzles?
It suggests she's a pressured extrovert, naturally outgoing, but she retreats when the public pressure gets too intense. It sees her as overwhelmingly intuitive, always focused on that big picture vision. And here's the key. It concludes that feeling is her core driver, and she just uses thinking as a really well-developed tool to get to her goals. And finally, her lifestyle is clearly judging, marked by all that meticulous planning.
So, with those 4 letters identified, extroverted, intuitive, feeling, and judging, the investigation starts to zero in on a single primary personality type. When you put all those traits together, you get a profile that's known for its charisma, its idealism, and its natural ability to lead. And that type is ENFJ. In the MBTI world, it's often called the protagonist or the mentor. The ENFJ profile fits that inspirational K-culture advocate role like a glove. But what makes this hypothesis really compelling, according to the report, is what it calls the shadow side.
It suggests that under a lot of stress, an ENFJ's natural empathy can start to look manipulative, and their deep need for harmony makes them incredibly sensitive to criticism, which would explain those periods of withdrawal.
But hey, any good detective always considers other possibilities. So the report also looks at the evidence for a very similar but crucially different type, ENTJ, the commander.
Now, this slide gets right to the heart of it. Both types are charismatic leaders, for sure. But what's the core motivation? For the ENFJ, it's all about social harmony and shared values. For the ENTJ, it's about logic, efficiency, and just getting the job done.
In the end, the report argues against ENTJ. It says her biggest passions, like that 20-year commitment to animal rights, seem to come from a place of deep personal values, the world of feeling, not the cold, hard efficiency that really defines a thinking type. So after weighing all the evidence, sifting through the clues, where does the report finally land? What's the final verdict here?
So the bottom line is this. The report concludes that a stressed ENFJ is the most likely hypothesis. Why? Because it doesn't just explain her charisma and her vision, it also gives a pretty coherent reason for the controversies and her specific reactions to all that criticism.
And based on this profile, the report actually offers some practical advice. First, it says, lean into her strengths. Focus on authentic things she truly cares about, like animal rights or promoting the arts. And second, to handle controversies, it suggests she should use her strategic, logical side, that T, for clear, fact-based communication, instead of just relying on emotional appeals from her F. And this whole analysis really leaves us with one final and I think pretty provocative question. For any public figure, really, where does the authentic person stop and the carefully calculated performance begin? Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining The Explainer.